Hey everybody, today on Northern Revolutions, I'm joined by a special guest, my pal Joe from Racer Records. He's going to sit down with me today and we're going to have a chat about something that I've never really paid much attention to or really had much appreciation for, and that is soundtracks. The conversation Joe and I had is recorded for an episode of the Vinyl Community Podcasts. For those that don't know, the Vinyl Community Podcasts is a twice weekly podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from, Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever. It is hosted by a revolving cast of characters from the vinyl community. And twice weekly, there's an episode featuring something about vinyl record collecting. So I'd encourage you to check that out. Stay tuned. Welcome, everybody, to another installment of the Vinyl Community Podcast. I'm joined once again by my good pal, Racer Joe. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. I have been away for a little bit. I haven't been away per se. I just haven't posted, and everybody's probably wondering, why is the guy that posted almost every single bloody day not doing anything? But
you've been a busy man.
Been busy. It's good busy though. So for those that were concerned I wasn't around, I'm still here. I just make special appearances on my favorite shows. That's what I'm doing now.
Well, I'm pleased to have you with me. I might as well let folks know Joe has started a record store. So if you're in Saskatchewan, check out Racer Records on YouTube. I'm sure Joe will have all of the details on there. But how's it been? How is the first few weeks of being a record store owner?
It's been good. We're a couple of weeks in, and all I've done is just promote on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram. And there was a few inroads I had. There was a Facebook page I already had going, Sask Vinyl page that I was able to utilize and things like that. But it's been steady. It hasn't been crazy. But we're also right now, because we're a retail shop, kind of, but not really, within a shop. And the main store is Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And that's not exactly prime record digging time, right?
True.
If I was still working full time, I wouldn't be able to make it in Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So with that taken into consideration, it's been pretty decent. We're going to probably give ourselves one evening a week and then one Saturday a week. It's not going to be all the time. And that'll probably make it a little bit busier, but it's been good. People are coming in and finding. I haven't had anybody yet come in and not at least walk out with one. So I consider that to be okay. Yeah, some have walked out with 30, some have walked out with one. So It's been good.
Yeah. Very nice. Very nice. Well, our topic this evening or this afternoon or this morning, depending on when you happen to listen to this episode of the podcast, we're talking about soundtracks today. The often maligned, the sometimes forgotten, the sometimes looked down upon, and the often cherished record, I guess you could say. It's everyone kind of has a different take on soundtracks. So Joe and I both have some soundtracks, and we thought that there's some interesting things to talk about on that topic. Are you a soundtrack guy, Joe?
I am a soundtrack guy to a certain extent, I suppose, but more the obscure soundtracks, and I've pulled a couple, and I guess a couple aren't all that obscure, but there's the Footloose, there's the Roadhouse soundtrack, which actually I don't have and I should have because it's a very good one with all the Jeff Healey stuff on it. But it's more the obscure stuff. And what I kind of like a little bit as well, and I forgot to go pull them, and maybe I will, is there's the stuff like the scores from Halloween. Like a lot of the John Carpenter stuff, and maybe you've got a little bit of that pulled out. I've got a bit, but I didn't bring it out. I'm still waiting on, I ordered the Godzilla -1 score from, I can't remember the record label, and it was supposed to come sometime this month, so they've got 4 days to get it here. I don't think it's going to happen, but I'm really looking forward to that. Do I put them on all the time? No, but they hold a place, and they hold a couple of bins worth in the collection anyway. So how about yourself?
I would say I'm not typically a soundtrack guy. I have some. And by some, I mean maybe 15 or 20.
Yeah.
My wife loves soundtracks. When we're, at a flea market or a record store, that's the first spot she goes to is soundtracks. She loves soundtracks. I I love soundtracks if I love the movie. I love
Sure.
movies. I'm a big movie guy, and every soundtrack that I have is for a movie that I absolutely love. So I have no soundtracks for a movie that I don't love. So, I like them insofar as they're an extension of the movie to which they're associated. So,
Maybe that's a question in the comments, or something could put in the. Is there a really good soundtrack that is part of a sucky movie, or I
well, I
don't know,
thought
like,
about that. Right? Is
yeah,
there a soundtrack, or are there soundtracks out there that stand on their own away from the movie? Maybe. I don't
yeah.
know.
I,
I don't
I
know.
have to think a little harder about that one. So if it's
Sure.
an official question, you got to give me a minute, but I don't
Well,
know.
I think we'll just leave that for the folks that watch this on YouTube. Maybe they want to leave some suggestions or thoughts in the comments. Please do, because
Perfect.
I don't know that I have an answer off the top of my head, or even after I think about it. So,
Yeah,
you know, I
agreed.
wanted to circle back to something you mentioned when you mentioned about the score for something. As I was kind of prepping for this, I I sort of thought to myself, I think there's four kinds of soundtracks. There's the original score, right? So the one that automatically pops into my head is Star Wars. The John
Right.
Williams score. I mean, those aren't songs; those are, I want to say, mini symphonies, right? So,
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
that kind of original score. There's the I call it a random collection. So it's the soundtrack that is just the songs that happen to appear in the movie. And I think of a movie like Dazed and Confused, and it's just a bunch of 70s rock songs, right?
Sure.
So
Stranger Things maybe falls into that
sure,
category, the series, because it's not that the music's of the time frame, not necessarily equating to the show or what's really
right,
going on. Although it could be argued that if you didn't have the Metallica song in the bat sequence in Stranger Things, spoiler alert, that it wouldn't have worked, but it probably would have with a different song. But anyway, yes. Sorry.
right,
Go ahead.
right. And then there's I sort of thought like a themed collection of songs, uh, a bunch of songs that tie into the theme of what the movie is, rather than just you know this movie set in the 70s. Here's a bunch of 70s songs. So those are similar. And then you've also got the fourth kind, I think, that are songs written for that movie,
Hmm.
and those are
Yeah.
kind of the four. And I think I have the only thing that I didn't pull is I don't have any original scores. Even though I'm a Star Wars fan, I have it on CD, but I don't have it on vinyl. But I think the other ones I've got kind of some of all of them, and we may show them, we may not. It depends where this conversation goes. Is there of those? Is one of those sort of prevalent in what you've got, or is it just kind of just depends on the movie?
Yeah, I think it depends on the movie a little bit, but I mean, again, I've got a few scores, not a whole bunch, but a couple. And again, I don't listen to them on a regular basis, but they definitely serve, probably a time frame, right? If it's Halloween or it's the night before, I'll throw on the soundtrack to Halloween. It seems like John Carpenter did the thing. He
Yep.
was almost more of a composer than he was a movie guy. It's almost like he went, "Yeah, I might as well make some movies. I'm just going to make the soundtrack for them anyway." And there's
Yeah.
a really good box set, and people should go back and watch the box set video tie-in. You see that?
Yeah.
I think he's actually got a box set because, like I said, it's stuff like The Thing and Halloween, and he obviously did some other stuff. So there's that. I guess if I was to look through my stack, I would probably be of the kind where, well, there were songs written specifically for these movies. So I think the one category you were searching for is that where, well, again, time frame 70s, 80s. The other would be they plucked songs that were already written, because there's songs that
Sure.
where the soundtrack is all new stuff, right? Like Kenny Loggins, all of that was never. I don't believe that was on albums before it was on soundtracks, like Top Gun and
I
things
don't
like
think
that.
so.
danger zone. So I think that was written specifically for. Speaking of soundtracks, Kenny Loggins is kind of epitomizes, but
Yep.
so again, just looking through the quick stack here, there's a little of both. How's that for a wimpy answer? I got a little of both, where they
Well,
did
that's
pull
okay.
from certain
I
time
mean,
frames, but
it's a valid answer. It's a valid
it
answer.
is, I guess, yeah.
I've got a little bit of everything, but I would say that I do have kind of um, I skew a little more heavily to the songs that are written specifically, the albums that are specifically written for a movie. Um, Again, because I love the movie, and chances are, if it's written for that movie, you're probably not going to get that anywhere else. So, um, not that any of these are, of the, they're not musical geniuses, but, I look at stuff like Smokey and the Bandit. I mean,
Didn't pull
Jerry
that one.
Reed. What
Yeah.
he wrote some great stuff for this. And then I look at kind of a lame movie, but I love it. It's kind of has a cult following. Eddie and the Cruisers, John Cafferty and the Beaver Brown Band.
That's one of my favorite movies and soundtracks. Like that is an album. There's an album where if there was never a movie along with it, it still would have stood on its own and done
Correct.
really, really well. Yeah, great pick. Great pick. I forgot to pick that one out.
And I think the best one of them all, when I think of songs that are written specifically for a movie, the Tom Hanks movie, That Thing You Do. I mean, this sounds like every one of these songs are obscure songs from the 1960s. They're not.
Yep.
They were written in the 90s for this movie.
Or the movie. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
This is probably the soundtrack I listen to more than any other. It's absolutely fantastic. Those are just some examples, but I mean, I've got a lot that were written. A lot is a relative term when I say I only have 15 or 20 soundtracks, but the largest percentage are like that, where they're written specifically for a movie. And I didn't realize until I was pulling some records for this that was in fact the case. I got a bunch of records because I like the movies, but I didn't realize that a lot of them were because they were written for those movies.
Yeah, and there's again, we mentioned a couple, but as I think about it a little bit more, American Graffiti, there's a perfect example of it was all 50s music because American Graffiti's was based in, so it was all existing material that they just pulled together. If you were ever to do I don't think there is many, and I could be wrong, this could be total BS, but Martin Scorsese and the music that he puts in his movies, I don't know that there's ever really necessarily been soundtracks. I'm sure there is.
I don't know.
As an example, in Quentin Tarantino, for sure, there's soundtracks that go along with the movies. So there's a very good example of a guy that takes great music and puts it in his movie versus writing it, right? You look at Pulp Fiction. I think I have one in my pile, not Pulp Fiction. I have another. Well, yeah, no, that's the Farrelly brothers. Maybe I don't have a Quentin Tarantino, but Reservoir Dogs, and how do you never think of that scene when you hear Stuck in the Middle with You, Steelers Wheel Now? If you've seen the movie and you hear that song, that's just what happens, right? And there's guys that can do such a great job of that, of picking the music for their movies from existing stuff, right? And those two are probably two of the best. And even there's guys like Danny Elfman, where Elfman will write a score for stuff like Beetlejuice and that, but then there's also a little bit of Oingo Boingo, Dead Man's Party from Weird Science, and so there's a lot of redeeming qualities to soundtracks. I think you said it off the top, they get written off a little bit, but there's a lot of people that really do appreciate them and enjoy them. Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. There's a great example of an album that has just been played to death forever, but that was all original material for that as well. Not so much me because I was around when it came out, but to you, it's more nostalgic, and it almost might seem like, hey, they took a bunch of disco and put it on there. That was all written for that movie. Right. It just happened to be 20 great number one hits or whatever it ended up being. So,
yeah. I admit I'm guilty of that reaction. Oh, it's just a soundtrack, right? Like I don't. Before my wife and I started I've been collecting for years, and my wife is, not nearly as long, but before her and I started looking at records together, I would never even look at the soundtrack, man. I'm like, what do I care? They're soundtracks. To me, they were
Yeah.
almost like throwaways, right? Like, whatever. But as she would pick up some of these soundtracks, it kind of opened my eyes to go, hey, there's some really good music on these things that, often gets ignored, especially when it's kind of the original stuff. I mean, the ones that are compilations, you can find those everywhere. But then again, if they're pulled from other albums, you've got to get a bunch of albums to get that. I'm not a huge compilation fan, but they're put together, I guess, to kind of foster some kind of mood or emotion in you or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
I think there's
There's
something to be said for that.
It's tough. There are deep cuts, if you can call it that, on soundtracks, right?
Yeah,
I mean, we talked about that on albums by artists individually. There's all the stuff that got played on the radio, but there are lots of great songs on soundtracks that were never on the radio. They were only in the movie. And when you rewatch that movie 20 years later, you go, "Oh yeah, right. I forgot
I
about that
forgot
song."
about that song.
Like "Don't Change" from not Amusement Land. What's it called? The one, damn it. Don't Change by NXS was in Adventureland.
Adventureland. Yeah.
Yeah. And hadn't heard it for forever. Watched Adventureland, and it was over the credit, and it's like, holy shit, this is such a good song. I forgot about this because it wasn't a hit when it was on the album, and it wasn't a hit when Adventureland came out. But when I watched it 5 years ago, and oh man, that's awesome. I love that. So there's a lot of great stuff like that too. So possibly maligned a little bit because and if I was to say that it is that way for me to a certain extent, it's because it's like you're listening to the radio, but that's not it. It can be.
Right.
There's soundtracks that are, and Saturday Night Fever and Grease are ones that kind of fall into that category. But so I don't know if that's the mentality, maybe a little bit for guys like maybe like you and me, where we'd kind of written them off to a certain extent.
Yeah.
For me, it was anyway. It's like, oh well, that's just like listening to the radio, because especially certain soundtracks that got played a whole bunch, but there's still some great deep cuts that you can find on some soundtracks as well.
So what's two or three soundtracks that you think are just outstanding?
Sure. So I'll give you an example, a couple of examples, and a story, because
I
if
like
I don't
stories.
talk for 5 minutes before I show an album, it's just not me.
Right.
So when I was a little kid back in the day, yes, there was electricity, but B, there was bowling alleys, and I was in YBC bowling, and I'm not sure if
Me
you're
too.
familiar with that, but
Me
yeah.
too.
So I think we all were. But there was a bowling alley, and so my dad would drop me off in the morning at 9 or whatever. I'd bowl for a couple of hours, and then at noon, across the street there was a theater, and most of the time they were showing stuff like King Kong versus Godzilla, which I've seen. I like to say 100 times. It's probably not quite that, but it's up there. So I would always go bowling. He would drop me off. I'd go bowling. Then I'd walk across and I'd watch the double feature. And like I say, most of the time it was King Kong or it was something like that. But this one time it was a movie called Times Square. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this or not.
Never heard of it.
It's a decent movie. I think it holds up. I watched it about a year or so ago, and it holds up. Kind of about a couple of runaway kids and that, and it's decent. But for me, because unfortunately in Regina, we didn't have the best selection of worldly music, or at least the stations that I had access to, whether it was me not hearing it or them not playing it, I don't know. Anyway, up until I saw this movie, I had never heard Sedated by the Ramones, and that's why I wore the shirt. And I don't remember when that was. And Sedated, because this is an album that draws from previous music. So as soon as I heard like the first couple of notes of Sedated, it was like, okay, after the movie, I'm going and I'm buying whatever soundtrack this is because I have to have that. So it's got that. It's got Iggy Pop on it. It's got The Cure. So early Cure, though, very early Cure, because this is from 1980. So there you go. That puts it back a little ways. But Walking the Wild Side by Lou Reed. Desmond Child is on here. The Pretenders, Susie Quattro. So it's a fantastic album. And again, it was the first time I heard Sedated by the Ramones, and then was kind of hooked after that. So That was very good. That's an example. Another one that's kind of obscure. Well, not obscure,
Oh,
but
yeah,
very good.
very good.
Um, if you acquire the taste, it's an acquired
Yes.
taste, but it's one of those that I would think a fair amount of my friends would go, "What the hell are you listening to that for?" Based on a lot of the other things that I listen to. But I love this album, like the Soggy Bottom Boys and everything.
For those listening on the podcast and not watching on YouTube, we're talking about the soundtrack for "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou."
I forget that part. Yes. Oh, brother, where art thou? And the first one was Times Square. Um, just great. The Farrelly brothers, again, pretty decent with their choices of music, but this was a
Such a
little more.
strange movie, but such a good movie.
I know. With the Paul, what brand was he using? Pomade, I think. I can't
Something like
remember. It's
that.
been a bit, but yeah. Now it's no Big Lebowski, and I have the Big Lebowski. I don't think I pulled it out, but still. So again, we talked. I talked about Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino, but the Farrelly brothers put some pretty darn good music. All of the Lebowski soundtrack is very good. So that's another one. That's really good. And then my favorite soundtrack of all time. Is this one, Heavy Metal. So this was drawn a little bit. This is kind of a combo one because this was drawn a little bit from stuff that was out there, right? But then there's a couple different songs called Heavy Metal that were written specifically for. I mean, Devo was already out and it wasn't from this. And then Cheap Trick Reach Out, I think, was already on an album. So there was some songs written and then some songs were drawn for. And Journey, Nazareth, Stevie Nicks. I mean, you just can't go wrong. That's probably my favorite combination of album and movie is Heavy Metal. Those are great. Those two that I first pointed out, but that's probably my favorite of. And I've got a couple more that are up there close, but that's probably, like I said, my favorite soundtrack to one of my favorite movies. So
my favorite, and I already mentioned it, is That Thing You Do, the Tom Hanks
yeah,
movie. It's just, I mean, the movie is great. For those that haven't seen it, it's a period piece. It's set in the early '60s. A band from Erie, Pennsylvania, goes on to essentially be a one-hit wonder.
yep,
Is spoiler alert, but it's a
yeah,
25-year-old movie, so deal with
yeah,
it. But
yeah,
everything in this just drips with nostalgia. I mean, I wasn't alive in the '60s, but it has that very '60s feel to it, and it's incredibly well done. And the music just feels like it was lifted from the '60s, but it's not. The title track, That Thing You Do, was written by Adam Schleisinger from Fountains of Wayne, who unfortunately passed away during COVID. But
yep,
he wrote an absolutely incredible song that sounds like a number one hit from like 1964. It's just, this is an absolutely incredible soundtrack. And funny enough, this just came out on vinyl like 6 months ago, for the first time ever. I mean, I had it on CD, but it took them 25 years to put it out, almost 30 years to put it out on vinyl. But that's always my favorite soundtrack. Um, Another one that I think is fantastic. Again, it's another movie that is awesome, but Walk the Line.
yeah.
I'm not a big Johnny Cash fan. Like he's fine and I'll listen to him. I got to have a couple Johnny Cash records. But what I love, I mean, it's a great movie to begin with. But the fact that this is Joaquin Phoenix and Reese Witherspoon recording the music and
Yeah,
doing an incredible job of sounding like Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash. I mean, hats off. It's incredible
yeah,
for that
100%
reason.
agree. 100% agree. Fantastic movie, good biopic. I'm a Cash fan, but yeah, both of them, like Phoenix did such a great job. But I mean, obviously we can compare him to Johnny because we've seen Johnny a whole bunch more.
Right.
I'm familiar with June, but she's not out there like Johnny. But Reese was. They were just both unbelievable and fantastic music. So
Great soundtrack. And another one for a movie that I don't know that necessarily a lot of people know. There's a movie in the '90s called Backbeat, which was about the Beatles in Hamburg.
yeah, I'm not familiar with that
Oh,
one. Yeah.
oh, fantastic! So it's mainly about Stu Sutcliffe, the original bass player, John's best friend, who died of a brain aneurysm just as the Beatles were becoming famous, and he's played by Stephen Dorff.
Okay.
This movie, I'm a Beatles nut, and I think this is the best Beatles movie that's ever been made. But
Oh,
uh, the soundtrack for this movie is contemporary musicians performing those songs that the Beatles would have played back in Hamburg. So, those sort of raucous, early American rock and roll stuff like Long Tall Sally and Twist and Shout, rock and roll music, Good Golly Miss Molly, 20 Flight Rock, that kind of stuff. But here's the thing. Here's the people on this album. The drummer was Dave Grohl.
never heard of him.
Never heard of him, right?
Never heard of him.
For those, Nirvana, little band, some people may not know.
Yeah.
Uh, Two vocalists, Dave Pirner from Soul Asylum and Greg Dooley from the Afghan Wigs.
Pretty good.
Two guitar players, Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth and Don Fleming from Gumball, and the bass player was Mike Mills from REM.
Pretty nice.
Holy crap.
Yeah, no kidding, eh?
I mean,
let's get a band together. Okay, that'll work.
And here's the thing. The only way you'd know that is there's not a picture of them. There's just a mention of who played. Like, they made no fuss or no anything when this movie came out, or even since that, hey, there's a pretty damn all-star band that recorded this album.
Right.
It's not really talked about, but they do a really great job of sounding like early, 1961 bar band Beatles. It's just an absolutely amazing soundtrack. Watch the movie if you haven't, Joe. It's incredible.
I look forward to it. That's great because I'm just not familiar with, and that's one that should be right up my alley. But as a quick side note about documentaries, now none of these are documentaries, but that's another one where there's not really a soundtrack that goes along with it. But I've watched two in the last couple of days, and I just bring it up quick. But the Stax documentary, Soulville, USA. Mm-hmm. Make sure you watch that. Very good. And then I watched a brand new one about the Beach Boys last night, and it's also very good. I
do want to see that. The one that's on Disney Plus or whatever.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So, are we just going to keep going with what we're showing?
Yeah, absolutely. We can. Sure.
What do you want to do? Now, there's a couple that, as we're doing this, I'm thinking, oh man, why didn't I grab that? Oh man, why didn't I grab that? And two by the same guy, who you will, I think, agree with me. The first one is the Batman soundtrack, which was, of course, Prince, right, with Bat Dance and all of that.
Yep.
And then Purple Rain. We all forget Purple Rain was the soundtrack to the movie Purple Rain.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
So there's maybe the ultimate example of songs written for a movie, or one of them. And I miss that dude, man. He was so good, and I appreciated him at the time, but I appreciate him so much more now. It sucks, and it's too bad that sometimes we don't appreciate them as much as we should until they're gone, right?
I'm with you. I didn't necessarily appreciate him as much when he was alive, and I'm not the wrong choice of words. I'm not a big fan of his music, meaning I'm not like, oh, I got all this stuff from Prince. I respect it tremendously, but I'm not. It's not really quite in my wheelhouse. But what I do respect, and he doesn't get enough praises for, the man was a wicked guitar player.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you started to say he doesn't get respect for, I knew exactly where you were going. And all you have to do, you have to watch two things. If you don't want to agree with us, watch two things. Watch him do the guitar solo for While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Just going to say that. The concert for George.
Tribute to George.
Yep.
Or just watch Purple Rain from the Super Bowl.
Yep.
And you tell me he's not an outstanding guitar player.
Amazing.
So Tom Petty, everybody that's on stage, Prince played the solo on While My Guitar Gently Weeps. So there you go.
Nailed it.
Oh, man.
Nailed it.
So good. I watch that. I don't know if I watch it weekly, but I make sure I watch that every once in a while just to go, yeah, that guy was unbelievable. So
And I mean, I think probably everybody knows when that song was originally recorded, the guitar solo uncredited was Eric Clapton.
Yeah.
Prince does a better job than Clapton did.
For sure.
Definitely. I mean,
agreed. So there's a couple that I didn't pull out, but we'll give honorable mention to. Here's one that I pulled out. And again, I don't know how many times I've seen this movie, and it's been forever, and I should watch it again because I think it will hold up. And it's the Lost Boys soundtrack.
Yeah.
Great, pretty good movie. cult classic-ish, right?
Sure.
With Keeper and that. But In Excess on here, Jimmy Barnes from come on, Joe, Australian band. Cold Chisel, Jimmy Barnes, In Excess, Good Times Tonight. But some of the other stuff on here, Lou Graham's on this, Lost in the Shadows. But the one that always gets me, and it's such a great song, is Cry Little Sister. Now, the gentleman's name is Gerard McMahon, who I've never heard of other than on here. But for those watching, listening, do yourself a favor, just grab somewhere, and YouTube's a good place to do it, Cry Little Sister. It's haunting. It's fantastic. I really, really like it. There's others on here, Echo and the Bunnyman doing The Doors' People Are Strange. This is just a really, really good, different album for a pretty decent vampire movie with some Canadian kid in it. So that's a good one.
True.
And one more, and then we'll get going. I can't not do an episode of something and not talk about Joan Jett. But speaking of good Canadian kids, there's Mikey. Where is he? There he is.
Yep.
This one's good. For those, I should say what it is. It's The Light of Day, because I forget sometimes people are just listening, not watching.
Right.
But it's the soundtrack to the original motion picture, The Light of Day. Michael J. Fox and Joan Jett were brother and sister. They had a band. It was good. The title track, I don't know if everybody knows, but written by Springsteen. The Light of Day is actually written by Springsteen. And I don't know if I've ever heard him do it. I think he does it from time to time. I think he does it live in one of those, like when he does the songs where people holds up the cards at the concerts. I think he's done Light of Day. But, it's a lot of Joan on here. But there's some other stuff. Bon Jovi's on here. How to say New Jersey and not say New Jersey. Just show a picture of Bon Jovi and Bruce Springsteen in the same place. But
there you go.
Yeah. Who else is on here? Michael J. Fox has one on here. The Barbusters, which was them. Fabulous Thunderbirds. So, yeah, this is a pretty cool soundtrack. And the title track for sure, Light of Day, again, it's a great Springsteen song, not really necessarily performed by Bruce Springsteen. So,
sure.
There's one more. There's a whole bin of them over there. That's just another one that I pulled out. So
I had a couple more to show. And this one I'm going to show because my son asked me to show this. My son is 8. And when I said I was doing a podcast tonight and he asked, what are we talking about? I said, soundtracks. He goes, Dad, you've got to show. So I'm going to show it. But it brings up an important thing that I think we should talk about when it comes to soundtracks. So my son is absolutely obsessed with Ghostbusters.
Yep.
I love Ghostbusters too, one of my favorite movies. The soundtrack, frankly, kind of sucks, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
I mean, but this is one of those soundtracks, and there are many like it, that are sold for the express purpose of one song. And yeah, there's other stuff on here. I've never listened past the first song. The Ghostbusters theme song is amazing. Ray Parker Jr., a monster hit in the 80s. It's still a monster hit today. And but there are many soundtracks like this that people bought it for one song, as I bought this for one song.
Right. Yeah, and if you said, Joe, I'll give you $1 million if you tell me another song on that album, you would not owe me a dime. I have no idea. Footloose is a little different because there was Holding Out for a Hero as well, right?
So that whole soundtrack is phenomenal. I love that soundtrack.
That's a good soundtrack. I agree.
I don't have it. My wife does, but that's a fantastic one. I don't think any soundtrack discussion would be complete without talking about this guy who has made more than several soundtracks, and this is personally my favorite. The soundtrack man, Ry Cooder.
Yeah.
Crossroads. I mean, I have a couple others that he did, but this is my favorite. And Crossroads is, I think it's a great movie. I mean, it's a retelling of that myth of Robert Johnson selling his soul to the devil at the crossroads. And part of this, it can't be. Part of this is just like 80s cheese when he has the big
him and Steve Vai
when they have the guitar duel at the end is really cheesy and did not age well. Like it's kind of crap. Yeah. But the whole movie is it's got heart and it's good. And I don't know squat about Southern blues or any blues, but I enjoy this. It's a good listen.
I agree. It's very good. Yeah.
Ry Cooder makes some great soundtracks.
He does, definitely. There is Now we talked about scores, so there's scores. Another big thing as of late, anyway, is the video game albums and the video
Yeah,
game scores. So is that a soundtrack? Not necessarily, but sometimes it. I guess what
I
made me
guess
think of
so.
it is I thought maybe where you were going with was the Super Mario Brothers movie. I thought maybe that's where you were
Oh,
going with the album your son wanted you to show. It ended up being Ghostbusters, but yeah. So and there's guys you mentioned yourself, right? John Williams. There's a guy that how many scores has he been on and forever? Danny Elfman has done a lot for a guy that was kind of reluctant, and Tim Burton. Well, just give it a shot, and then it turned out to be a pretty good idea. So there's definitely some guys like that. I've mentioned John Carpenter a number of times, and yeah, there's definitely some guys that we equate to soundtracks. I think Kenny Loggins is one, right? There was Loggins and Messina, but really we knew him from Footloose, we knew him from
right.
Top Gun, and that kind of stuff, definitely. So Brian Adams, you and I are the love of Brian Adams that we
Sure.
share with
Yeah.
each other.
Yep.
I still attribute the major success that he got to the soundtracks that he was on, right? The
I think
one
that's a
for
part of it. Sure. I mean, what was it? Please Forgive Me off of the Robin Hood Prince of Thieves
yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever. I
and
mean, that
everything
was
we
massive.
do. Yeah. So I think that's a big part of it still, right? But
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of those sort of mains. I mean, I think another one I think of, I just finished watching the Bon Jovi documentary on, it's not on, I don't know,
I think it's on.
Hulu or
Yeah.
whatever the hell it was on. Great documentary, but John did the soundtrack for Young Guns too, and they wanted Dead or Alive, and he goes, no, I'll write you a whole soundtrack. And the big hit off of there was Blaze of Glory, which is a great
Yep.
song. And I don't have the sound, I don't have that soundtrack, but I should track it down one of these days. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of those sort of rocker guys, like you mentioned Springsteen, that has penned a number of soundtrack songs. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. It's
And I think I mentioned it earlier, but a great one that I don't have that I should is Roadhouse. And I watched Roadhouse a little while ago, and it kind of is the same. I think the way that you were thinking of Crossroads, Roadhouse is about the same, where it's like, yeah, that's okay. I don't know if I remember it being quite that campy, but it was. But man, Jeff Healey and the band in that, and just the whole thing, it was so good. And it that was one again. There are a lot of movies that rely heavily, I think, on the music. Could they survive without it? Yes, but just the way that it gets woven in and what gets played along with just makes such a big difference.
well, that is the perfect segue to one that I have to show. Um, this is my wife's favorite movie and my wife's favorite soundtrack, and we have several different versions of this soundtrack. But of all the soundtracks I've seen, I don't know one where there has been a better production made of the soundtrack, and that's for the movie Almost Famous. I mean,
Hmm.
that movie has to have the music. It's about a fictitious rock band called Stillwater in the 70s, based on the Eagles,
Yeah,
but um, it's about a young kid who tags along with this band on their tour, sort of befriends them. He's trying to get an interview for Rolling Stone. You know, that's Cameron Crowe's real life, is it not? Is that
it is. Yeah,
that's
that's right. It's
what the
based
deal
on
was?
him, right? Yeah,
Um,
that and Fast Times was the other part of his life. So it's
right.
a pretty good couple of movies. But anyway, yes.
Fantastic movie, and it's for the most part, it's all songs of the time, right? It's the Who, it's Jethro Tull, it's Joni Mitchell, it's the Allman Brothers, it's Fleetwood Mac, it's Led Zeppelin, you know, all of the songs of the time, and then there are songs by the fictitious band Stillwater, and I don't recall off the. This is my wife's. I don't actually own this, so I don't remember who made up the. I don't know who made up the fictitious Stillwater band, who those actual musicians are, but um, what a great soundtrack! And there are several different versions of it. This is the most recent one. This is the Uber Deluxe, but it's 6 LPs, and then there's a book in here. And I mean, what a hell of a we talk about soundtracks often being the kind of an afterthought. This is one that is as important as the movie, and they've gone to such amazing lengths to put out different versions of this soundtrack over the years, and this one is just, I think it's the best soundtrack I've ever seen, as far as I'm concerned. Not necessarily talking about the quality of the music, but just the job that they've done to package this soundtrack in this format is incredible.
Fantastic. And there's not so much that one, but just as you talk, it makes me think of other things. And as an example, what a movie and a soundtrack can do. Bohemian Rhapsody in Wayne's World was a little bit of a hit the first time, and then in Wayne's World it was a massive and insane hit, right? I mean, a lot of people, Queen fans, knew Bohemian Rhapsody beforehand, but again, another
Oh,
song.
it brought it to a whole new audience.
It did, right? You just see them in the car, right? You see them in the Mirthmobile driving down the street, and you hear that song.
I wonder if, and hot take, I wish I had Concert Buddies oven mitts for this, but I wonder if, Queen touring as they do with Adam Lambert, which I think is fantastic, by the way.
Yep.
I've not seen them, but I love that that's happening. Would that even be possible without the popularity that was a result of that song being in Wayne's World? And I think probably not.
No,
they brought in a whole new generation, the Queen.
Yeah. 100%. They kept making great music even after that, right? Like stuff like Innuendo, and that was after that. But yeah, I think you're right. I think Queen maybe could stand on their own without it, but it certainly has drawn in a bunch, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
definitely. So there's some classic soundtracks that again are just tied to such generational ones. And again, as you're talking, I'm thinking, but stuff like Forrest Gump. Another great example is Good Morning Vietnam. What's kind of cool on that one is there's the little clips from Robin as well from the movie that they peppered in there a little bit. That stuff's really good. There's a lot of those where it's just, again, the music has just not made the movie and the movie not made the music or whatever, but they just, if you didn't have one or the other, would it have been what it would have been, right?
Well, that makes me think of the greatest soundtrack story, I think. This is not a soundtrack, but this is an album that would not exist had it not been for a soundtrack. And this is Lisa Loeb.
Okay, yeah.
And so the deal here is this is her debut album, Lisa Loeb and 9 Stories. It's called Tales. Came out in 95. And her big hit, the one that broke her, was called Stay, which is on this record. But it's on this record because it was a hit. And she was the first ever unsigned artist to top the Billboard charts. And she did that because she was friends with Ethan Hawke. Ethan Hawke was in the movie Reality Bites. And he convinced the director of Reality Bites to put her song Stay in the credits of the movie. And they did, and it took off, and radio stations picked it up. She wasn't signed to a label. Got to number 1. That song made her career. We wouldn't have no idea who she was if it wasn't for the soundtrack for Reality Bites.
Yeah, for
what
sure.
What a cool soundtrack story.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's
I don't
great.
have that soundtrack. I have the studio album, but I mean,
yeah, I think we started off this both questioning the fact that why do we like soundtracks? But now the more that we've talked about it, I start to think of soundtracks, and there's some really great ones. Singles, that's another great one. Pirate Radio, that's a very good one. Now I think maybe there's one vinyl pressing, but it's hard to find. But that's great. That's a cool movie too. I just watched again recently. There's the ones that we see all the time. Again, especially if you're out buying record collections, there will always be a Grease. There will always be a Saturday Night Fever, regardless of the age of the person and the number. If you only buy 3 from them, one of them will be one of those 2 records, and then a couple others. So
I hate Grease, but believe it or not, I have the soundtrack to Grease 2.
Oh, do you? Yeah.
I hate Grease. I love Grease 2. Something about Michelle Pfeiffer singing Cool Rider.
It just
holy moly, pour ice water on my head. My God.
That's good. There's, like I said, I start to think about it now. And I could walk over and probably grab another 5, and we'd both have memories of them. We've watched lots of movies. Yep. We've listened to lots of music.
Yep.
And that's what a soundtrack will do for you. So, yeah, sometimes you put it on and it's like listening to the radio, which I think a lot of us maybe try and get away from when we're listening to our albums. But there are some that are fantastic. Just because it's a different person every song doesn't mean anything,
Yeah.
right? It is what it is. So,
And I'd even go a step further. I think the soundtrack maybe stays with you longer than the movie does.
I think so. Yeah, it could for sure. So, because, you can watch it over and over, and there's movies I've watched 5 times. Like I've seen Heavy Metal 10 times, and,
Right.
But I've listened to the soundtrack 50 times. Right. So,
and you're going to be in your car singing that song. You're not going to be in your car reciting lines from the movie.
no, I do tend to say a lot of Mike Myers lines, though. Mike Myers is my most quoted guy between Shrek and Austin Powers and Wayne's World. There are quotes galore from ceiling to floor.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep.
But, yeah, Austin Powers. There's another example of some Burt Bacharach, right?
Sure.
How many people did that turn on to Burt a little bit, and they went, yeah, that's pretty good music. Let's listen to that, right?
Well, and the second Austin Powers movie, directed by Jay Roach, who is the husband of my fantasy wife Susanna Hoffs from the Bengals.
That's right.
And the Bengals are in that movie. They're that '60s band that's behind Mike Myers in the one scene. And that movie is responsible for the Bengals recording their comeback album.
Mm-hmm.
If it hadn't been for that movie, there wouldn't have been Doll Revolution by the Bengals.
And you know what? There's going to be movies that will come out this year that will have fantastic soundtracks to them. We don't hear it as much. It doesn't seem like it. Although it's a world of singles these days, unfortunately, not in the grand scheme of things, and not maybe what a lot of us will listen to, but it's a lot of singles out there these days. They're not making albums, which means they're not making a lot of soundtracks either. But there's some fantastic stuff out there still, for sure. So.
Yep. Well, that's a good place to leave it as we close in on our time limit. So thanks, Joe. That was fun, as it always is. I really appreciate it. It went by in the blink of an eye.
It always does, and thank you very much for having me, and let's do it again soon.
Anytime, my friend. For those that are interested, please check out Racer Joe on YouTube. There's a lot of great videos that I think you'll enjoy. Until next time, I'm your host, Rob from Northern Revolutions. Thanks for tuning in. This has been another installment of the Vinyl Community Podcast. See you, everybody.